Welcome to the only daily podcast focusing on compliance news of the day. Each morning, start your day with a cup of coffee and Tom Fox, the voice of compliance, to hear about 4 of the top compliance, corruption, or leadership stories you will need to start your day. The Daily Compliance News is a production of the Compliance Podcast Network.
First, a word from our sponsor. The Daily Compliance News for June 13, 2023, the FTC Sues edition. And we begin with that story from the Wall Street Journal. Sarah Needleman and Dave Michaels reporting that the Federal Trade Commission seeks an injunction to stop the Microsoft Activision Blizzard deal. The agency will carry out a separate process to block the deal. The FTC sought the injunction in San Francisco federal court, citing media reports that Microsoft was considering closing the deal despite legal opposition in the U.S. and U.K. A judge would need to agree to issue the injunction, which of course happened after a hearing where the FTC would have to present evidence that the deal is illegal. Pretty ballsy move by Microsoft to go ahead and close the deal. Hoping that that's going to force the FTC's hand. Well, it did, just in another way. Next up, from Euronews, an ethics board will stamp out corruption in Brussels, says European Commissioner Vice President. The EU is making fresh effort to increase transparency and its own credibility following the Qatargate corruption scandal. The Vice President of the EU, or the European Commission, Vera Jourova, said in an interview that 6 months have now passed since the biggest corruption scandal in the history of the EU. 60% of Europeans apparently are unhappy with the way the EU is dealing with corruption, and now the new ethics body will hopefully set the standard for all EU institutions in the future. So let's hope that the EU can get its act together. It took a serious black eye over Qatargate. Next up, JPMorgan has settled with the Jeffrey Epstein victims for $290 million. This is to settle a class action, resolving a large part of litigation over the bank's relationship with Epstein. Monday's settlement follows months of embarrassing disclosures that JPMorgan continually ignored internal warnings and overlooked red flags about Epstein because he was such a valuable client. He was a client from 1998 to 2013 and was kept on even after being arrested for prostitution-related charges and pleading guilty some 2 years later. This accord settlement would resolve claims by potentially more than 100 victims. So it must have been bad. And finally, from the Financial Times, an article on why Ukraine must fight corruption even during the war and certainly post-war. The Daily Compliance News is a production of the Compliance Podcast Network and a proud member of C-Suite Radio. Thanks so much for listening. I hope you'll join me again tomorrow.